You are muted.
Now?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Prof. Ramayah, our third keynote speaker. Prof. Ramayah is currently a professor of technology management, School of Management, at University Sains, Malaysia, and a visiting professor at Minjiang University, China, University Malaysia Sarawak, University Kebangsaan Malaysia, UKM, and University Technology Mara, and an adjunct professor at Sunway University and University Tenaga Nasional, United, Malaysia. He was also a visiting professor at King Saud University in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and an adjunct professor at Multimedia University. He has an H index of 81, citations of 28,260, and an I-10 index of 412 in Google Scholar. His H index in Scopus is 44 with 7,648 citations, while his H index in ISI Clarivate is 33 with 5,030 citations. He's currently the chief editor of the Asian Academy of Management Journal and Journal of Applied Structural Equation Modeling. His publications have appeared in Information and Management, International Journal of Operations and Production Management, Tourism Management, Journal of Travel Research, Computers and Education, International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management, Journal of Environmental Management, Technovation, Journal of Cleaner Production, Business Strategy and the Environment, Corporate Social Responsibility and Environmental Management, Technological Forecasting and Social Change, Journal of Business Ethics, Internet Research, Computers and Human Behavior, Information Systems, Resources, Conservation and Recycling, International Journal of Information Management, Safety, Science, Industrial Management, and Data Systems, International Journal of Production Economics, Journal of Hospitality Marketing and Management, Personnel Review, and Telematics and Informatics, among others. His keynote speech entitled Improving Rigor in Empirical Research and Updated Guideline. Well, I just want to know, I just want to say something that he will not be with us physically, but due to some commitments, so he sent us a recorded video. So let's enjoy watching the video.
I don't think there is someone in Malaysia who don't know Professor Ramayah.
Yes, he is our hero.
Yeah. Let me share his keynote.
We cannot hear anything. If you
I think the sound is not shared, right? Yes. Do you, okay. It's okay now, right?
Not yet. Maybe when you meet share.
Good morning. Welcome to the International
Yes,
Conference
yes,
on
can.
Information Systems and Intelligent Application, ICI-SIA 2022. First of all, let me thank the organizers and Dr. Mustafa Al-Imran for inviting me to share on this topic. My name is Ramayah. I am from the School of Management. I've been at the School of Management for 32 years now. I will serve for another 2 more years, hopefully, before I retire. So I joined School of Management in 1990 as a tutor. 1998, I got promoted to a lecturer. 2003, I became an associate professor. And in 2011, I was promoted to a full professor of technology management. And over the last 32 years, my focus of research has been largely based on quantitative survey research. And some of the observation that I have over the last 32 years is that although there has been lots of changes in the rigor, unfortunately, these changes in the rigor has not trickled down to researchers. So even at the PhD level, what you find is many researchers are still doing what they have been doing like 20 years ago. So somehow this has to change. Hopefully, at the end of the session, you will have a better understanding of some of these changes that is taking place in the literature. So I will focus on 3 main areas. Number 1, on measurement issues. Number 2, on data source issues. And number 3, on single source bias issues, especially for those who are using survey research, which are cross-sectional. So those are the 3 topics we will cover. There are many other topics that can be covered, but due to the shortage of time, we will just focus on these 3 main issues that actually is important for many researchers to understand. To start off, I will share these 2 editorials from, the first one is on changes in rigor, which was written by Chang et al. In 2010 in the journal called Journal of International Business Studies. And what caught my eyes was this. We recognize, of course, that standards for rigor in empirical work are continually rising. What were acceptable methodological practices even 5 years ago can easily and rapidly become unacceptable as social science scholars better understand the limitation of their empirical techniques and develop more rigorous methods for identifying and correcting for potential biases in their work. What it's trying to hit on is, if you take a paper that was published in this particular journal 5 years ago and you use them as a guideline for your own research, chances are that when you submit to the journal, it will get rejected. 5 years ago, the methodology was maybe acceptable, but now they are no longer acceptable because there are some changes that has taken place. So those are some of the things they highlight in this particular editorial. The second editorial is a paper I really like most because this was a hard-hitting editorial on why you should not be consulting literature which was published like 30, 40 years ago, especially for methodological understanding. Okay, and they cited these papers like Baron Kenny 1986, Potsakov and Organ 1986, Hammer 1967, and Fona and Lacker 1981. So if you're citing this paper in 1980s, 1990s, you're probably fine. But currently we are in 2022. So instead of Barra and Kenny, you should be citing Pritchard and Hayes. Instead of Fona and Lacker, maybe you should be looking at literature like Hensler et al. 2015 or Franke and Sasted 2000. 2019. So those are more current literature, and but you must cite some of these seminal papers in your literature. But for guidelines for methodological rigor, you should be citing more recent paper. You need to stay current with the methodology. Why these changes in the methodological rigor is important for a researcher is because we need to strive for stronger inference. When we do research, we are trying to infer, and to make strong inference, methodological rigor is quite important. Okay, it's quite important. So typically in modeling in quantitative research, we will follow this process called deductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, what you do is you start with a theory. Based on the theory, you will develop hypotheses. Based on the hypothesis that you have developed, you will collect and analyze the data. And then you will accept and reject the hypothesis. Okay. Okay. And when you have accepted or rejected the hypothesis, there will be some limitation. So what we do is we go back to the theory to understand better and see how we can improve based on the limitation. That's what we will be doing in quantitative research. So in quantitative research, one of the important guidelines that underpins a research model is what we call as a theory. And understanding of theory is very important for a quantitative researcher. And many researchers have a very weak understanding of what is a theory. For that, I would suggest there are many papers that you can consult for a better understanding of theory out there. But I found this book, the definition given in this book by Kerlinger and Lee in 2000, quite interesting. And what they have written here is a theory is a set of constructs or proposition put together to explain and predict a phenomenon. Okay, explain and predict a phenomenon. So the key idea is there are three key ideas. One is a set of propositions consisting of defined and interrelated construct. Number two, it establishes the interrelation between two or more variables. And finally, the most important one, it explains which variables are related to which variables and how they are related. That is one of the key features of a good theory. So we have an example of a theory that is well developed and well used in the literature called theory of planned behavior. And the other understanding you should have is theory also evolves over time. Sometimes the theories were developed and then there are some changes made to the theory. And you need to be current in terms of theory in your own area of research. So here this theory was developed in 1991. They have three variables: attitude, subjective norm, perceived control, intention, and behavior. This is a theory which tries to explain why a person performs a certain behavior. Okay, so the intention to perform a certain behavior is shaped by attitude, subjective norm, and perceived behavior, whereas these three variables are actually shaped by their beliefs. This was in 1991. In 2006, Azen revised the model. There's no more arrow from perceived control to behavior. Now, perceived control, there's an arrow that acts as a moderator between intention and behavior. So this was a change which took place after 15 years. Okay, 15 years. Then it took him another 13 years. He had a change of heart. Now, if you see, the theory has totally changed. Perceived control is no longer a predictor of intention, but it has now become a moderator between attitude and intention, subjective norm and intention, and it can also moderate the relationship between intention and behavior. So this is 2019. So as a researcher, if you are planning to adopt this theory, you should be informed by this current theory, not the 1991. That's something you need to understand and think about. So for understanding better the role of theory in research, you can look at these two papers written by Wilkins et al. And also Aguinis and Cronin. There's another two papers you can consult for the idea of borrowing theories from other areas of study. Those are some of the papers that you can consult to get a better understanding of what is the role of theory in research and how they can be utilized. So what are the suggestions for use of theories? Number one, review all the theories that has been used to explain the same phenomenon. We call them competing theories. Then you have to understand why you want to pick one theory over the other. That is a justification you need to have. You don't want to get into a situation when you submit a paper to a journal and the reviewer saying maybe that's another better theory to explain the same phenomenon. So you need to have an argument ready for the rebuttal. Pick one or two theories that would best represent or underpin the model that you have developed. Try to avoid theories that have been over-researched like technology acceptance model. So if you do a research using technology acceptance model and you submit to a good journal, chances are that the editor will reject the paper with a comment that another paper in time. Okay, I had that kind of rejections earlier in my career. So now I've started moving away from this theory called technology acceptance model. Okay, next, we will look at how a research model in quantitative research is developed. These are some of the typical variables you have in a quantitative research. We have the independent variable, we have the mediating variable, we have the dependent variable, and between independent and mediating variable, we can have a moderator variable that changes the relationship between independent and the mediating variable. And finally, we have control variables. Okay, so how do you identify them? We will work with the literature and the theory. We start with the theory and then we have literature to support and then we decide. There are some reasons why we need to control certain variable. That explanation needs to be there so that you can rule out some of these variables in your model. So let's say we begin with these two variables, job satisfaction and organizational commitment based on some theory. Typically, I normally ask a group of PhD students whether this can be tested, and the answer is almost always yes. At this stage, they cannot be tested. Okay, this job satisfaction and organizational commitment are two abstract concepts we have in our mind. Somehow, we need to measure them. Okay, this is where we call this stage as the theoretical level, at a higher level, and we have to bring them down to the empirical level. At the empirical level, what we are saying is we have these three indicators to measure job satisfaction. We have these three indicators to measure organizational commitment. So after we bring them from the conceptual level to the empirical level, then only we can test them. At the conceptual level, we can say they are propositions. At the empirical level, we call them hypotheses. Okay, hypotheses. So when we bring these constructs from the theoretical plane to the empirical plane, there will be a gap. This is where we will have a gap we call validity reliability gap. Why this happens is because the way we collect data, the way we analyze data, there are some errors that we need to cater for. That's where we will look at next on the measurement issues. Okay, the measurement issues. So when we have a research model, which is like this, we have some variables with the items. And after we have developed the model and collected the data, we need to develop a model, let's say in structural equation modeling. We have the measurement item and also the structural model, measurement model and the structural model that we need to test. So the first issue in the measurement model is what is the measurement theory for this variable called attitude. Is the measurement reflective or formative? Okay, is the measurement reflective or formative? That is one of the concern in the measurement. Next concern will be the issue of whether the measurement is unidimensional or multidimensional. Those are some issues we will discuss next. So the debate about this reflective versus formative measurement has been there for a long time, but unfortunately in many institutions and in many literature, the focus has been on the first measurement, which is called the reflective measurement. What is meant by reflective measurement is the construct scores are here. Because the construct scores are high, that is why it is reflected in the indicators. So if the construct scores are high, then the indicators will be high. If the construct scores are low, the indicator values will also be low. That's why we call them reflective. For formative measurement, on the other hand, the construct score is actually 0, and the construct scores are influenced by the 3 indicators. If all these 3 indicators are high, the construct score will be high, and if all the 3 indicators are low, the construct score will be low. In the first model, the items are supposed to be interchangeable, whereas in the second model, they are actually not supposed to be interchangeable. Okay, they are actually measuring different facets of the construct. So here we have an example of the reflective and formative measurement. On the left, we have a person who is timely. His response to item 1, item 2, and item 3 will be high. If a person is not a timely person, his response to item 1, item 2, item 3 will be low. That's why we call them reflective. Here we have another variable on the right, which is life stress. Life stress is actually 0. Life stress is influenced by these 3 items, which is job loss, divorce, and accident. If a respondent has all 3 together, life stress will be the highest. If they don't have any of this, then life stress will be the lowest. So you cannot delete any of them. They are not interchangeable. Okay. So even for formative measurement, although the formative measurement debate has been there for a long time, some people don't agree with them, but somehow that's still available in the literature. So when you have a formative measurement, there are 2 views of formative measurement. And this is argued well in this paper by Boland in 2011, Ken Boland. The first view is the formative measures are composites. Composite means they are not interchangeable. You cannot delete any of the item. But there are also a view that says that maybe these formative items are causal construct. There might be some conceptual unity, and we can actually delete some of the items which are highly correlated. So that's 2 views that you can look at. So you can use this literature wisely when you are doing your own research and decide which view you are going to adopt. And this is an example of a reflective measurement and a formative measurement that is given in the book by Hare et al. And in the book, they give you 2 examples of satisfaction, which is reflective and formative. The idea is that a variable can be measured reflectively or formatively, or depending on the way you construct your items. Okay, those are things we need to have at the back of our mind. Why this measurement issue is a problem is because of this paper, which was written by Jarvis et al. In 2003. They looked at 1,461 papers, which were published in Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing Research, and Marketing Science. And what they found was, this is what the authors did, model as reflective or formative. These are the correct ones, which is supposed to be. So model as reflective should be reflective, correct. Model as reflective should be formative. This is error. Model as formative should be reflective. This is also not correct. Model as formative should be formative, correct. So if you take these 2 columns together, these 2 cells together, 32% of the construct have been wrongly measured. We are talking about the top journals in the world. We have not come to the lower level journals yet. So instead of citing a paper in the past saying that because the authors did formative, we did formative, or they did reflective, we do reflective, you need to clearly articulate why your measures are reflective or formative. And I get that kind of questions by reviewers. Is your measurement reflective or formative? You need to clearly argue for the measurement. For those who are planning to use formative measurement, one of the things you need to do is you have to do redundancy analysis to assess the validity of the measurement. So typically what has been done before was, let's say you want to measure manufacturing performance as formative. You need to collect another variable which is reflective. And then you see a multiple item scale, and the correlation between your formative measurement and reflective measurement should be 0.7 or higher. But more recently in 2014, what has suggested was we have a global item. Let's say for manufacturing performance, we ask a single item, which is how good is your manufacturing performance? Not very good to very good. Okay, 1 to 5, then you can see the correlation between the formative item and the single item, which is global. That is one of the things you need to do as a researcher if you plan to do formative measurement. And this is also given in the book by Hare, PLS Primer 2014, 2017, and 2022, and discussed in this particular paper that we compared the efficacy of a single item versus multiple item measure as for redundancy analysis, and the conclusion was a single item works well. Single item works well. So you have a guideline from this particular paper. So next we will look at an example what happens if you are not very clear about the measurement, whether it's reflective, formative, unidimensional, multidimensional. Here we have a measure of performance with 4 items: profit, sales, ROI, and ROA. And you get a loading of 0.322, 0.217, 0.893, and 945. What typically a researcher will do is they will delete this item and this item from the measurement and then retain these 2 items. This is not the correct way of doing things. Why is that? Is because the software does not understand theory. What happens is they are looking at correlation. What the software is saying is these 2 items are correlated. These 2 items are correlated, but all these 4 items don't go together. Maybe they are not unidimensional. That's all it tells you. It's not indicating they should be deleted. But as a researcher, you should understand that you cannot measure performance without profit and sales. Okay, you cannot measure performance without profits and sales. So what you can consider doing is you can actually modify the model to have a model like this. Now we have 2 dimensions. The first dimension has profit and sales. The second dimension has ROI and ROA. Now if you see the loadings works well. Okay, these are things you can do as a researcher, but you need to go back to the literature and theory to see whether this can be done or possible. Okay, can be done or possible. Okay, the next thing we will discuss about measurement is the issue of unidimension versus multiple dimension, multidimensional measures. So to measure a variable that we have in our model, we can use a unidimensional measure. For example, we want to measure knowledge sharing. We measure them with 8 items, which is unidimensional. So this variable is unidimensional without dimension. And this comes from Au and Menguk. And the second measure of knowledge sharing has 2 dimensions from Bock et al. 2005. And the third one we have is a multidimensional with 4 dimensions. Which one you want to pick is up to you, unidimensional or multidimensional. They are there to measure the same variable. So you have to make a choice which one you want to adopt. Okay, that's the first thing. After you have adopted the multidimensional measurement, one of the common problem I see with many researchers, even in papers or thesis, is like this. So we have knowledge sharing with 4 dimension. Instead of drawing them like that in the analysis, what happens is they put all these 20 items together in one. So we are actually forcing a multi-dimensional measure into unidimensional. What will happen is you will see many of these items have very low loading. You may end up deleting half the items. Okay, so you're actually deleting dimensions from the model, which relates to an issue called content validity. Okay, so this is something I observe even at PhD thesis level and also papers submitted at journals that I review. So you should be drawing the model like this because your measure is multidimensional, not unidimensional. So what are the suggestions for these measurement issues? Number one is you need to understand your measurements well and argue out whether they are reflective or formative. Don't do reverse engineering. After you collect your data, you start changing from reflective to formative one day and then formative to reflective another day. That's not possible. That's not good research. Be explicit about your measurement, not just citing a paper, saying that because the previous author measured it reflectively, I also measure them reflectively. That's no longer acceptable in good journals because you need to argue why you think they are reflective or formative. For those who have formative measurement, you need to consider collecting a global item for the redundancy analysis. My suggestion is to avoid the use of multidimensional measures, as multidimensional measures adds to the respondent fatigue because your questionnaire will be longer. That also taxes the respondent. And you can choose the shortest possible instrument because instruments also are refined over the years. It starts with a longer questionnaire now. We have a shorter version of the same instrument. You should be adopting the shorter version of the same instrument. Next, we will start looking at data source issues, which are related to how you collect your data. So when you collect your data, we have single source, multiple source, and multi-level, and also time lag data. So typically when you collect your data, this is a method called same source, same method. We want to collect data about personality and performance. Personality is collected from the employee. Personality data is collected from the employee. Performance data is also collected from the employee. Personality is using survey. This site also is using survey. This is what is typically done. This is called same source, same method. The second way of collecting the same data is on the right-hand side, personality is answered by the employee. The performance is answered by the supervisor. Now you have multiple source of data, but method is still the same. Survey questionnaire, survey questionnaire. The same kind of study can be done with the third method, which is the personality is answered by the employee, but the performance is not collected from the employee or the supervisor. It comes from the company secondary data, which is annual evaluation. This is where we have multiple source, different sources. Okay, different sources. Those are possible ways of collecting data. But these are all same level, okay, at the same level. The second level of data collection is like this. We want to study organizational level high performance work system. Okay, high performance work system leads to employee well-being. And employee well-being leads to job involvement. Okay, job involvement. What we do is we have collected data about this high performance work system from 50 companies answered by the manager, and employee well-being and job involvement is collected from 451 employees. Okay, so when you have this kind of level, we have level 1 individual level and organizational level. There are many software that cannot cater for this kind of analysis. There are some software available like HLM and multi-level windows that you can explore. And we can also collect data. For data collection, we also have time lag, no? Time 1, time 2. For that, here we have an example of data which is collected at time 1. This is collected at time 2, but this is not from a questionnaire. This is from viewing log. What is meant by viewing log? They have agreement with a company that streams videos, and they collect data about how frequently the consumer watches the video and how many times the consumer watches the video from the company. Yeah? So this is time 1 and time 2. For those who are planning to do mediation, this is one of the designs suggested. You have the first variable collected at time 1, the mediator collected at time 2, and the third variable collected at time 3, where the lag is 1 week. Okay, 1 week, a 3-wave data collection. No? But this kind of data collection, you have a slight problem because the dropout. No? We started with 436. In the second stage, it became 330. In the third stage, it became 275 only. Those are some of the issues with mortality. Yeah? We can also do multi-level mediation where we have team error management collected from 33 teams, job satisfaction, gratitude, OCB and creativity is collected from the members of the team, and they are collected at time 1. These 2 variables are collected at time 1. These 3 variables are collected at time 2. That's also possible in terms of design. And one of the common models you see in many information system research, we have this intention and behavior, and they collect intention and behavior at the same time, which I think should not be done. This intention should be in time 1. Actual behavior should be in time 2. So in this paper, what they did was they drew this arrow and mentioned that they are not going to test this because they will not follow up with the text compliant behavior. So what are the suggestions for data collection issues is this. Try to use multiple sources of data as much as possible. That's the first thing. If you plan to do data collection, you should have some time lag between time 1 and time 2, especially when you are doing mediation. That's a big issue that also discussed in the literature. And finally, explore multi-level modeling if there is a need for it. If you want to study situation where you have a system which is adopted at the organizational level and you see the adoption leads to some impact at the individual level, then you may want to consider multi-level modeling. Finally, we will look at this issue called single source bias. Single source bias is when you collect data about your independent variable and the dependent variable from the same respondent, there will be some same source bias. Okay, this was something that was suggested by Prof in 2003-2012. And when we measure a variable, we have 3 components: true score, random error, and the systematic error. What we want to have more is this true score. Random error we try to minimize by using multiple item scale. But we have another third component called systematic error, which is called the method variance. We try to minimize this by doing some remedy, which we will talk about, called procedure remedy and statistical remedy. So this paper in 1988 mentioned that the 2 components of bias is, the first one is common method variance, which is 32%. And because of this common method variance, it leads to 26% bias in the observed relationship among construct. And in some journals, they accept single source data. For example, like this paper we submitted to Total Quality Management and Business Excellence. They asked us to do Harman single factor test, and then it got accepted. But another journal called Journal of International Management, They actually rejected our paper, this paper from one of our alumni DBA student who submitted a paper. After 1 year in review, he got to revise and resubmit. And finally, when he resubmitted, the editor actually decided to dash reject for a simple reason. He said this, my careful review leads me to believe that this manuscript does not meet JM's publication threshold, as your data probably suffer from common method self-informant bias because both dependent variables and the independent variables were responded to by the same respondent. As you may know, this is now considered a serious flaw in management research, if not in marketing research. But he gives you some guideline. You need to develop or collect more objective measures of the dependent variables in your study design for external validation, or satisfactorily justify that the self-informant bias in the use of subjective measures was minimal or non-existent. Okay, so what he's suggesting is if you cannot have objective measure, you need to justify. So what we will be looking at is how do we justify this issue called common method variance. And for that, you can look at this paper by Jordan and Trott, but I will quickly explain what is the difference between common method variance and common method bias. Let's say we want to study job satisfaction and organizational commitment, and we find that in the population over time and meta-analysis, the R square is 20%. Okay, and what you do is you collect data from a sample. Job satisfaction is answered by the employee. Commitment is also answered by the employee. You get an R square of 60%. So this is what we call as common method variance because of the way you collected data. The R square is now 60%, 3 times more than what is supposed to be there in the population. That's called common method variance. The second one, common method bias, is in the population, the strength of the relationship between satisfaction and commitment, the beta is 0.25. But when you collect data from the sample, you get a beta value of 0.5, which is twice higher than the population value. This is what we call as common method bias. The common method variance has led to this common method bias. So to address this common method variance, we have procedural remedy and statistical remedy. So and many editors will like the procedural remedy. Statistical remedy is what you do after you collect your data. It is always better to plan ahead. So for that, marker variable technique has been introduced by this guy called Lindell and Whitney, these two guys. What they suggest is you collect an additional variable, which is multiple item scale, which is theoretically unrelated to variables in a model. Okay, and then once you have collected the data, you will point the marker variable to all endogenous construct. So previously, when we regressed job satisfaction to commitment, it was 32%. When we added the marker variable, the R square only increased by 2%. So the change is very minimal. And we can also compare the beta value before the marker variable, which is called the baseline model, with the marker variable model and see whether the beta value remains significant. That's also one thing you can do. And these are examples of marker variables available in the literature. Social desirability, cognitive rigidity, attitude toward the color blue, attitudes towards private label brands, and PANAS scale, a positive effect and negative effect scale that you can also use to justify as a marker variable. For those who have not collected this additional marker variable, you may want to look at this method suggested by Koch and Lin called full collinearity. What you need to do is after you've collected the data, you create a random dummy variable and you regress all the variables you have in your model towards on the dummy variable. Okay, and if your VIF is more than 5, you have a problem called common method variance. If not, you can argue that you don't have a problem of common method variance. And for that, you can consult these two papers by Willems et al. And Simmering that talks about marker variable and how to use them in your papers or your research. You can consult these two variables by Walter and Cronin and Lin et al. I find these two papers quite easy to follow. Maybe you want to refer to them. And more recently, we had a paper by Miller and Simmering which talked about this issue called the ideal marker variable, and they have suggested you may want to explore this variable called attitudes towards the color blue. Towards the color blue. Okay. So this was a paper we submitted to a journal, and this was a suggestion by the editor. They rejected the paper, and this was the one of the comments. In terms of accounting for common method variance, the use of a marker variable is preferred these days. And they also suggested to have an objective measure of your variable for external validity. So those are the two things I've discussed earlier. And finally, what are the suggestions for handling this issue called common method variance? There are some authors who are proposing we should not be collecting cross-sectional data, but cross-sectional data is also still useful in many situations. So if you are still using cross-sectional data, you need to address the single source bias. That's given in the paper by Guide and Ketokiwi. And Richardson et al. 2009 suggested that you use a good marker variable as a procedural remedy. Okay, those are things I would suggest also for those who have cross-sectional single source data, And more recently, in 2022, this is a paper published, this is a paper which is forthcoming, editorial in Journal of Operation Management by Shang and Ronco. They have discussed several other issues that I have not covered in today's talk, like issues related to experiments, adaptation of measures, control variables, sample selection, endogeneity, choice of software, like whether you want to use PLS or AMOS, and also the reporting transparency. So I would suggest you to go through this paper to get a better understanding of the changes in the Rigor. Okay, if you have any other questions that you want to ask, you can email me at ramayah@usm.my or ramayah@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can also send them to Dr. Mustafa, and I will try to address them when it comes to me. Okay. So thank you very much for listening to my discussion. I hope the conference organizers have a good conference, and also the participants have a great conference ahead. Take care, stay safe.
We would like to thank Professor Ramayah for the insightful keynote. We were hoping to have him with us today, but unfortunately, due to his commitment in other issues, he has a workshop, as far as I know, so he is a bit busy with that. Thank you, Professor Ramayah. Thank you. And thank you for the audience who stay with us till the end of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, and wish to see you tomorrow, inshallah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mustafa. Thank you all. See you tomorrow, inshallah, in the second day of the conference.